Back when I was in the pro shop business, Brian, everyone always wanted to come in and buy a new ball because they wanted to get more RPMs on the ball. They thought there were some secrets to the drillings, anything like that, because RPMs is what everyone wants. What are RPMs?
Well, RPM stand for revolutions per minute, so it's basically how quickly that ball is rotating when it's on the lane.
So it's a measurement of how fast it's revving. They used to call it revs. Back in the day, everyone wanted to get more revs, and now the keyword's RPM. Is there a difference between RPMs and revs?
Well, revs, if you think about it, is just the amount of times that the ball is actually going to sort of turn over as it's going down the lane, which really just depends on how fast you're throwing it. And if you're throwing the ball 10, 11, 12 miles per hour down the lane, it's going to have a lot more time to turn over more times. In terms of RPMs, we're not necessarily based off of how fast it's going down the lane.
So RPMs is a more accurate measurement of what the bowler is imparting to the bowling ball. Revs back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we used to measure revs about how many times it rev going down the lane, how many revolutions it made going down the lane. That's what back when bowling balls were just starting to have some dynamics, everything rolled in the same place, and everything was kind of consistent, and the oil patterns were consistent. Balls started getting a little more dynamic, so they started measuring the first 15 feet and multiplied that by 4. Still not really accurate. So RPMs, what we do to measure RPMs is actually very accurate.
Sure. Now, some people may say, well, the ball's not on the lane that long, so, what do we say about it?
Oh, yeah, we've heard that term that, revolutions per minute, the ball's on the lane for how long? 2.5 seconds, so how can we do RPMs, revolutions per minute? It's the same reason we measure miles per hour. Bowling ball's not on the lane for an hour, and we're still measuring. It's an accurate measurement of what the bowling ball's doing. So, are all RPMs created equal?
No, that's where we start to talk about the release ratio, because every rotation, depending on your axis tilt or the circumference of the ball that's actually in contact with the lane, it's going to make the revolutions per minute act sort of different.
So bowlers are always worried about my RPMs. They should be more concerned about what their release ratio is, RPMs based on their axis tilt.
Yeah, and match that up together.
Let's go ahead and take a look at Earl and show some of the relationships of different RPMs will do to ball motion. Brian, so we have Earl here, and Earl is going to show us some shots changing the RPMs, but some of the stuff's going to stay the same for this release for Earl.
Yeah, we're going to keep the miles per hour the same, so how fast the ball's traveling down the lane. We're going to keep the tilt the same, so how much track circumference is actually being covered. And then we're going to keep the rotation the same, so how much they're on the side of it versus up the back.
So we have 16 miles an hour is what we're going to be throwing at 16 degrees of tilt. Very normal release for most people going in rotation 60 degrees. We're going to be a little bit more on the side of the ball than most people, but it's a good average place to start. So we're going to start at 200 RPMs. What type of player would be around 200 RPMs?
I would say a more down and in type player, more stroker type player, someone that's generally not going to have too much change of direction overall.
So it's going to be more where we might see some players that just don't have a lot of hand. Now we're going to the 325.
Yeah, and then we start to get into a little bit more. You can see with the change of ball motion, you can see that the ball has a lot more ability to sort of change directions once it gets down lane.
Now we're 450. Now we're into the Tommy Jones, the Sean Rash categories. This one, when we're talking about even ratio, they need some more speed.
Yeah, you can see at 16 miles per hour, it's not quite going fast enough down the lane for that ball. And just on the pattern that they're bowling on, the ball's going to really hook across the lane quite heavily.
Now we did 575. That's when we get into the realm of the two-handers.
Yeah, so if you're looking at Jason Belmonte, Oscar Palermo, any of the two-handed players out there with 575 to almost more, 600 RPM, 16 miles per hour isn't going to cut it.
They definitely got to be throwing at 21, 22 miles an hour. So getting back to the ratio, for the lower RPMs, you need slower speed. Higher RPMs, you need more speed to be able to get matchup.
Exactly.